There we go.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Sermon Preparation Workshop here at St. Martin in the Fields. Sam, welcome back. How are you?
I am well. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking, actually, rather than just asking how are you, in the being with way, being with tradition, we've had 3 weeks off, and we've had the Christmas season and New Year's. I wondered if you'd be able to share with us what the heart of your Christmas season has been.
Well, I managed to get a bit of time writing. I haven't, I published the Christology book, and a lot of people, maybe some people on this call, have joined in the course that Zach Koons is running. I know there's been 100 or so people on that call at the first, and I think the second one is going to be on Thursday. That's wonderful, and I'm glad that people are reading that book. And I've been sort of trying to find time to start work in earnest on the Holy Spirit book as a sequel, and I finally got a bit of time over New Year to make a start on that. So I really enjoyed that.
And when should we expect that book?
Oh, yeah, I'm not committing myself on that.
Fair enough.
I had a healthy research fellowship for 3 months for the Christology book, and I don't see a sign of one of those appearing out of the sky anytime soon. Right. So I'm going to have to plod along at the pace I can do it. But I did feel I made some real inroads into that, and so I feel much more clear about what I'm trying to say in that book.
Great, that's fantastic.
How about you?
Well, I had a very rewarding week away in a country I'd never been to before. I went to Belgium, which like I say, never been to, and it was a new experience. I got to enjoy lots of beer and chocolate and churches, which, what more could you want?
That's a great combination. In fact, just the beer and the chocolate would be fine for me.
Yeah, exactly, quite. But I come back refreshed and ready for 2026.
Terrific.
There we go. Well, we've got quite a lot to try and get through today, so we're going to do a whistle-stop tour this week, folks, of the second Sunday of Epiphany and the third Sunday of Epiphany, because we managed to get you just before Christmas up to the baptism of Christ, but we're continuing on. So we're going to cover this Sunday, the 18th of January, and then the following Sunday too. So, Sam, shall we begin on the 18th with Epiphany 2 and have a quick look at Isaiah 49?
So Isaiah 49 is a very special passage to me, because one day in January 2005, I happened to be reading this passage at a time when somebody just whispered in my ear that they would like me to move to North Carolina from Cambridge, England, where I was living at the time. And I thought, what a ridiculous idea. And I called my wife Jo about something else, and I said, I've just been reading, it's too small a thing that you should raise up the tribes of Jacob, I'll give you the light to the nations. I just felt I was being told that verse was for me today. And she said, I just read that verse too.
How funny.
And lo and behold, 6 months later, we were living in North Carolina. So it's a very special passage for me. And that sense that it's too small a thing, and what the smaller story is, that, in a sense, that you take for granted, and what the bigger story that you're being called to me, I think, is pretty close to the heart of how vocation works. And that was one of the most, if not the most profound experience I've ever had of vocation.
Wow.
So there.
Yeah, that was quite something. Is there, I guess sorry, I'm struck by the story.
Steady on. You're not saying a preacher has actually moved to congregation of one.
What do you think? Yeah, I guess then for us, obviously that's a really powerful story for you, and for anyone who hears it.
I think you're saying that's all very well.
I guess I'm saying for you, that's really like, obviously, if you were preaching on this passage, you can use that personal way into it, right?
Yes, I mean, I don't tend to tell stories about my family, my wife
Yeah.
or children. I do talk about my mother and father, but because they're long gone, and but for people who are still alive and are in my life and relationships, I don't very very seldom. I think I've only done it 2 or 3 times ever, and with the very particular reason for doing so. So I tend not to tell those sort of stories, but partly because they have the impact that it just sounds like it's had on you, which is to say, great, that's wonderful, but where does that leave the rest of us? And so that's not terribly helpful. But also, I think your family is there to be enjoyed, not to be used. And I've met plenty of clergy kids who felt they were used by their parents preaching rather than enjoyed, and so I would never want that to be the legacy I left with my family. That's a sort of generality about family illustration. I do know 1 or 2 preachers who do almost nothing but talk about their family, and I find that nauseating, really. Anyhow, I think I did in fact preach on this passage last Sunday at St. Martin's, because I felt that Isaiah 42 clearly is the key passage for understanding the baptism of Christ, but this is a key passage too for understanding the passage of Christ. So the baptism of Christ. So and it isn't usually, obviously the way the lectionary works, you don't get to connect all the passages, but I felt there was a lot here.
Yeah.
So and I did talk about the smaller story and the bigger story, and rendered that in a number of different ways. Both in terms of theatre and in terms of the story of Israel, and in terms of what we might be being called to. And I've since had 1 or 2 pastoral conversations with people who have basically started the conversation by saying, I've spent the last 2 or 3 days wondering what for me was the smaller story that I was lapsing into, and what was a bigger story I was being called to, and which one I'm currently pursuing. So clearly, it's been a framework that has been generative for people.
Brilliant. Well, I presume then that sermon will be available online to watch or read if anyone is interested.
I think it is already. Yeah.
Great.
Even as
just to encourage you folks, if you're in the comments, we do see them. We see them all, whether they're coming from YouTube or Facebook. So wherever you prefer to watch us, do send them through, and we enjoy reading them. And particularly if you have questions, we enjoy trying to wrestle with them and answer them too. Let's continue on then to the opening of Paul's letter to the Corinthians.
Yeah, I mean, these are tricky passages to preach on. It's you can go into detail about the elaborate nature of a Greek letter, but I'm not quite sure that's going to change anybody's life, or particularly increase people's understanding of the epistles. You certainly you can highlight the fact that grace is mentioned in verses 3 and verses 4, and it's always worth talking about what grace means. But I think that the line that stands out to me is, in Epiphany season, the word revealing in verse 7. Anything about revealing is kind of fair game in Epiphany season. But to me, the line that stands out to me is God is faithful.
Yeah.
Because that is the bold proclamation of those who say it with conviction, and that is the great lament of those who feel that has not been their life experience. And I think on a pastoral level, exploring in what sense we can say that with confidence, and in what sense we say that tentatively or with sensitivity. I think that would be the place I would go if I was going to preach. I mean, it is not a passage that begs to be preached on, if I'm honest, but I think
tricky when you get these. We've had them a few times, I feel like, recently, where we get these kind of openings of the letters. Where you go, we've got the greetings, and it's kind of similar language as well to what we might have heard.
So, and I think that's the nature of the lectionary, that
Yeah.
the lectionary is being written for the whole church. And, there are plenty of people in the church. I remember someone, who was very much of an evangelical persuasion saying to me 25 years ago, he'd just been ordained, and he said, is it true that the lectionary doesn't cover the whole Bible and leave some bits out? And I think I said something like, I'm jolly glad it does. But he was shocked because, he sort of somehow come out of seminary with a rather naive idea that every verse of scripture had sort of somehow equal weight in preaching and exposition. And I'm afraid I just don't think that. That's just not how it works for me. And well, I think there's a lot to say about 1 Corinthians in general, and when we get to next week, I think
there's more.
we get into the meat of it. But I think at this stage, these are opening preliminaries, and it's there for the sake of completeness. It's there for those who want to read every verse of the New Testament. I'm not sure it's really there for the preacher.
No, I tend to agree. Okay, well, let's get on to something we can preach on then, and that is the Gospel of John, chapter 1.
Well, I think I will be preaching about this at the weekend, and I think the two words that stand out, there are a lot of things you can say, because, like typical of a John passage, it's very difficult to preach on the whole passage.
Yeah.
But there's so many different bits you can preach on. I've heard a lot of sermons on verse 39, come and see.
Yeah.
That I think is a very familiar territory, and quite rightly so. I have myself preached on the passage, on the line, "Where are you staying?" Which in some ways is a very Nazareth community kind of text to preach on.
Yeah.
And then there is a sense in which, again, the Epiphany thing to preach on is, where is it now? The verse 31, that he might be revealed to Israel. Again, we got revelation again there. And that's, what Epiphany is all about. Unveiling, revelation, disclosure. But I think the thing that I'll probably go with, I haven't written it yet, which is unusual for me at this stage, but we're still kind of post-Christmas catch-up, is these two nature images, if you like, creation images, the lamb and the dove.
It's very funny, Sam, because we haven't talked about this beforehand, but I'm going to be reflecting on this passage on Sunday evening with our young adults group, and I'm also going to be reflecting on the lamb and the dove.
Well, there you go.
There we go. We're in sync.
Sorry if I steal your thunder, but I'm sure there's
no, you might give me some ideas, because I haven't quite finished mine yet either.
Well, yeah, basically, I think what I will want to say is that the lamb is the one that takes away, and the dove is the one that descends and remains. So, and in terms of what we understand of Jesus is, you're taking a traditional approach. Jesus lifts the burden of the heavy laden, as the hymn "I Cannot Tell" puts it. Takes away our sin, to use the traditional language. It's interesting, it says sin rather than sins here. And it says it in the present tense as well. It's not has taken. Obviously this is set in time before the crucifixion, before the resurrection. But even when we use that phrase in the liturgy, in the Agnus Dei, we say in the present tense.
Yeah, he takes. Yeah.
So there's a taking away and a kind of a removal of the burdens from our shoulders. And then there's a giving and a reclothing. And so I think the sort of, to see that complementary role of Jesus and the Holy Spirit, I think is very powerful, because in a sense, all you need to do as the preacher is to wander I wonder at the beginning of a year what you were asking Jesus to take off your shoulders.
Mm.
And I'm wondering, as you look ahead to the challenges of the year, what you're asking the Holy Spirit to clothe you with. It's basically as simple as that, I think. You know, you can frame it with stories and exegesis and scriptural texture and context, but I think it's going to be probably a sermon as simple as that.
Very good. Well, I look forward to hearing yours. And
I mean, I think you can certainly do a sermon, and I'll probably touch on this,
yeah,
that looks into the sort of hinterland of the Lamb, and that goes back to Exodus 12, the Passover Lamb. That goes back to Isaiah 53, the suffering servant led like a lamb to the slaughter. It's and the difficult area for someone like myself, who's very got a very abiding sense of being with, is that second sense of the Lamb, probably the dominant sense of the Lamb, is sacrificial.
It's a working for.
It's a very working for. And then, of course, in Revelation, we've got the triumph of the Lamb who was slain, and that's again some language that is tasty.
Mm.
And
so
those
would
are
you
probably
want to tackle that in the preaching?
Well, I think that's probably a
expert.
different sermon to take that on. It's a more cerebral, it's a more of a lecture type sermon. And I'm thinking this is probably a Sunday for a more tender pastoral kind of sermon. But, there's definitely a place for that. I think I would gladly do that if I felt I could answer the question I was asking. I don't feel I actually have an answer to that question.
Yeah.
And so I don't really like to take on a topic where I'm saying, gosh, this raises a lot of questions, and here they are, amen. I don't really think that's a sermon.
No.
I think if I can't find a way to resolve that satisfactorily and satisfyingly, then I'd say something else.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Good. Okay. Well, we must push on. We've got another week to do, so let's jump ahead if we can to the 25th of January. So we're back in Isaiah. No, we're at Isaiah 9.
Well, this is kind of an interesting one, isn't it? Because Isaiah 9 is a kind of passage that has been co-opted for a particular purpose. In the Christmas, Christian celebrations of Christmas. I mean, it appears in the 9 Lessons and Carols.
Yeah.
It's associated with a virgin conceiving and so on. And I vividly remember, to be a bit self-indulgent, a carol service in Liverpool in 1987, where all the lights were down and the candles were lit, and probably the most senior member of the congregation, who herself was probably in her late 80s, was chosen to read this passage and said the unforgettable words, "The people who walked in darkness have seen..." I can't read this, Vicar, it's too dark. So I've never forgotten.
No,
Isaiah 9 verse 2. I'm not quite sure if that's the resonance that people are looking for, but it certainly stays with me. So this is here because it comes up again in the Matthew passage.
Yeah.
And both are important, and I think it is a sort of place where you kind of preach on this, you're reading. But this is not kind of written as a kind of Christmas passage, obviously, in its original context. It's about the invasion by the Assyrians in the 8th century BC, as far as I remember, and about the invasion of the northern, of Samaria, of the Samaritan area, the northern kingdom that was destroyed by the Assyrians. And this is basically about Israel being overrun by Gentiles. So what's the significance of that? Well, if we all flip ahead to Matthew 4, then what you're seeing there is clear reference to Isaiah 9.
Mm.
And the significance of that is profoundly political. I mean, it's saying we are in a situation where Galilee has been overrun by Gentiles, i.e. the Romans.
Yes.
It doesn't say that out loud because, when this is being written, the Romans are still around, and it's basically
Writing in code in some way.
writing something that's anti-Trump and not expecting ICE to turn up on the doorstep.
Yeah.
So it's all written in code, which means for a lot of the church's history, people have missed it. But by providing that context in the lectionary, the compilers of the Revised Common Lectionary have given us a little bit of a nudge to say this is a very political statement. And Jesus comes into a context talking about a very disrupted earth, talking about the kingdom of heaven. So I think if you're going to preach on this passage, are you doing this one next week, or isn't it Homeless Sunday?
Yeah, I think Richard's on that one.
Yeah. I think the what actually, but you can give that as a bit of context to make sure people aren't too spiritual about it. But the kingdom of heaven has come near seems to beg for exposition, really. That seems to be the heart of this passage. And then, of course, you've got a political dimension. I mean, I think I can imagine if I was preaching a sermon on this, I would call it something like politics, economics, and discipleship, or something like that. Because the fisher of people, it's what I would call over accepting, because you have been fishing for fish and now I'm going to make you fish for people. It's the way, as Aquinas puts it, the grace doesn't destroy nature but perfects it. That Jesus is taking Peter and Andrew into a higher calling, from fishing for fish to fishing for people. And, it's not blocking the story, as improvisers would say. It's not saying it's wrong to fish, by no means. It's not saying fishing is great and just you carry on fishing. It's saying fishing is really good, but just imagine if you use those skills in a bigger context. But then it's got a massive economic payoff, because you've got Zebedee, who feels the impact of losing his livelihood. His two sons, his pension plan, bog off. So this is a Bonhoeffer type cost of discipleship, sacrificial service, ministry. There's an economic payoff to this. So we start the passage with a political context. Here we've got the economic context, and discipleship. When the kingdom comes near, there's a political dimension to it, there's an economic dimension to it, and then there's a personal response. I think that's your sermon, really.
There's also, I guess, linked to that thing with the Father, but also for Simon Peter, the personal familial aspects as well. I always wonder, Zebedee, well, what does his dad, is he saying, go on, follow him, he's great, what? And then also with Peter, we know later has some, mother-in-law or whatever, so wife, family, whatever. I think about the sort of familial implications.
Mixed feelings. I suppose I think of it like what it's like if your daughter says, "I've decided to become a nun."
Yeah.
Particularly in the days, when becoming a nun meant you probably wouldn't see her very much ever again. Or, Victorian era, I've decided to share the gospel in India, in the days when people often never came back. So, it's you're very proud and, so on, but you feel bereft.
Yeah.
So I think it's those kind of feelings. And I think if you can get inside those kind of feelings, that's all to the good. But to me, as I say, the overarching thing is to show the three-dimensional gospel. You could call a sermon like that.
Yeah, good. All right, let's go back one then to our continuing in Corinthians. What do we get here that is worth talking about?
Well, I think the one that begs to be preached on in the verse. I suppose there's two things here. So I would start at the end. The cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. So foolishness and power. I think a kind of a play around with foolishness, the foolishness of the cross. I more than once I've been upbraided for talking about foolishness. I suppose this also has a bearing. I think if I was preaching, I don't think I'm preaching. I think you said Rich was preaching.
Yeah.
Preaching this weekend, but there's a story I think I've told in this conversation before about when I was at Duke University and did the sort of opening address at the kind of freshers' fair to the new undergraduates about religious life, and said, all the religious life staff, all 35 of them or whatever it was, with Campus Crusade and the Buddhists and everything, I said, all 35 of them, they're all over the spectrum in terms of their conservatism or liberalism or whatever, but they all have one thing in common: they're here to ruin your life. And, I thought it would get people agitated and excited and so on. And of course, the Dean of Students was furious and took me to one side and, what on earth are you talking about? These people are paying $45,000 a year to come to. But I was talking about the foolishness. This is not the gravy train. This is not going to take you to Wall Street. This is not going to praise you for making a lot of money on the stock market. This is a very everybody here is about saying there's a higher loyalty than just earning a packet of money with your Duke degree. So I think that foolishness thing, which obviously is relevant to the calling of the first disciples away from a proper career into a ridiculous malarkey of following Jesus. So I think you can certainly put the two passages together in that sense.
Yeah.
But then if you really want to do a sort of programmatic let's do the whole of 1 Corinthians in one sermon, then it's all there really in verses 12 and 13.
Yeah, about
and Paul is really being sarcastic. He's pointing out, and his words still bear a lot of testimony for divisions in the church today.
Yeah. Sort of tribalism, or
I belong to Paul, I belong to Apollos, I belong to Cephas. He's basically saying, well, you don't belong to me. I mean, was Paul crucified for you? The absurdity of the body of Christ being divided is what this is really about. So, it's a good theme week of prayer for Christian unity. It's a good theme for that time of year. These sort of things can be a little bit tired, in a sense that ecumenism was very fashionable 20, 30 years ago. It seems to have run its course in some areas. I remember one of my tutors at university historically said, the ecumenism only becomes fashionable when the church is in decline. People looking around saying there's not many of us left.
Yeah.
When the church was thriving in the kind of Victorian imperialist era, nobody was interested in ecumenism then. Yeah. I think that's slightly unfair, but I think we're much more aware of the splits within our denominations than between our denominations today. many people have got much more in common with people in other denominations than in their own.
That is true.
Or at least they feel they have.
Yeah.
But I think the basic question that if we cannot be reconciled amongst our differences, we have actually no good news to offer the world, that hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And so, that would be a very suitable subject. So I'd say
I think it's something you've said on here before of the is it the radical proposal for peace of Christians? Stop killing other Christians.
Yeah, it's a Mennonite slogan, really.
Right. Yeah. But I think you think of that in our world today, and wars and conflicts and things. That's all there, and it also happens within our churches in a perhaps more metaphorical way. But yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, we are out of time, but thank you so much, Sam, for your insights. We've managed to squeeze 2 weeks into today's session. We're thrilled to be back, folks, and we will be back next Tuesday and continuing on as we journey towards Lent and Easter before you know it. But we're glad to be back. We'll see you later.